Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like Graveyard of Empires, The Dark, and the upcoming Miskatonic at Aftershock. It's Mark Sable. Thanks for coming on, Mark.
Thanks for having me, David.
So we are going to be talking about Miskatonic quite a bit later on, but I always love to talk to people when they first come on about their background and everything. And I came across an interview you did with Tom Spurgeon a long time ago, and it had one of the best anecdotes I've ever seen, which is that you once had a Marvel Comics bar mitzvah, complete with shirts for guests that said, "I had a marvelous time at Mark's bar mitzvah." And I don't want to get into that, but it does say that like comics have always been a big part of your life. Clearly you've been a comic fan for a long time. So everyone has their own like comic origin story, but when did your love of comics start? And really what made you love them so much as, I don't know, a storytelling medium?
So, let me think about, I think probably I remember my late father bringing me home comics from the newsstand, which should date me quite a bit, but that was always exciting. I remember going to a flea market and get like the first comic I remember buying was the Avengers had Red Ronin in it. He was this like giant like robot that fought Godzilla, and somehow it crossed over into the Avengers. Yeah, I started with superhero stuff in this but I did when I started collecting seriously, and I think what got me into it was the two books were the Larry Hama G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
Which was I think was surprisingly it is very good. I shouldn't say there's anything surprisingly about it, but it was like surprisingly like a lot more adult than the cartoon. And it had this continuing story that brought me in. And the second book was very similar, and that was X-Men, which was also, both like it was essentially like, a soap opera for, at that point you'd say probably, teenage boys, right? Like, the audience has diversified since then. But even then, it's funny to think that the era of X-Men that I grew up with was mostly women, right? Mm-hmm. Like it was the X-Men in the Outback. And so I appreciated like that. I felt like these were stories that were accessible to me, but at the same time, like I always felt like they were like, I was sort of like reading something smart that other people didn't know about. Like, I very quickly picked up on like, it probably wasn't hard to like on like, okay, like, the X-Men are metaphor for racism or metaphor for this and that. And I felt like it was being really smart, and then after that, like, so I think it's like the books itself, it was like, I was constantly seeing things that I wasn't seeing in other mediums. So like, or I wasn't aware of in other mediums. So like, I remember, probably the next big book for, reading, whether it was like Dark Knight and Watchmen, and seeing like, oh, like you can deconstruct things. Like, yeah, there are movies that did that, but I wasn't being exposed to that early because it wasn't,
wrapped in a popular package.
Right. And so I think that's what, that's certainly what initially attracted to me to the medium. I think, later on it became about, and we can get to this, but it became about like, I think it's a medium where, having worked in just about every medium, to varying degrees of success, like it's the medium that I felt that I've had pretty much the most freedom in terms of I've basically been able to tell pretty much exactly the stories I want to tell. And I think that has something to do with, that like there's probably because there's less money. So, the less money, the less pressure, the less number of people that have to get involved and make decisions. So, and that freedom has been great. And at the same time, writing is such a solitary profession that being, especially now as we're talking during pandemic, being able to collaborate with an artist, and a colorist and a letterer and editors and et cetera. Like there's something that's been really, really nice about that. So it's like been this mix of like getting to have my own voice. I obviously it is, it's a popular medium. You want readers, but also getting that magic of like still to this day, like, although I'm extremely proud that and feel fortunate that I've had comics published, like my favorite part of comics is when I get new pages from an artist.
Yeah.
I've been so fortunate that like almost always it's not only as good as I imagined, it's better.
Yeah.
And I think that's just been, I've been very lucky that I've worked with really good artists, but just also it's just, that's the magic for me. And then everything else is just sort of gravy.
I hear that a lot from writers because I think deep down comics, well, it's not even deep down, it's on the surface. Comics are a fan driven medium. A lot of times, I mean, almost certainly the people who start writing them later on were fans of it early on. And that's, a lot of times people act like that's a very unique to comics thing, but it's not like Steven Spielberg didn't like movies or something like that. There's always like a certain level of fandom connected there, but it's always cool seeing somebody like Jason Aaron talk about how he just got this new page in and he's like, oh my God, it's Ribic. Like, can you believe it? This guy's like unbelievable. I can't believe I'm getting emails from this guy with art. And like, that's the thing. I don't honestly like, that would be an amazing part about being a comic writer. That's like the main incentive if I wanted to do that, is just so I can get art from amazing artists and see what they're coming up with before anyone else can.
It's, yeah. And you know, it's interesting you bring up the fan dimension of it too, because the community aspect is also a big part of it. And that's both on a small, on a micro and on a macro level. So just having first of all, like, it's interesting. I'm at an age I can remember when comics were not cool, when superheroes were not cool.
Oh yeah.
So, it was always something that like, it was like you found somebody, if I found somebody that I met that liked comics in any kind, I was so excited and it became an instant bonding thing. So like I went to law school later on in life and like my best friend from law school, arguably my best friend in Los Angeles, we met because we went into Golden Apple at their old location and we had just started law school, had maybe been on for a week, and we saw each other there. And this is like, I don't know, this is like 2002. And I froze, and it's funny because like I had the comics in like a brown paper bag, and my friend describes it as like, I was acting like I was caught with pornography. So it was just like, like I was like, oh, I didn't expect to see somebody from law school, but like, we so immediately bonded over that, and just now he's like he's got kids who are my my niece and nephew, and it's just so there's that part of it. There's like there are still great stores here in LA, and I love when there's not a pandemic going on. Just being able, one of the things I miss is just going in and talking with people, whether it's the the staff at Golden Apple or Meltdown or Collector's Paradise here, like, or just some of the or other people, and then going to conventions, there is an accessibility. I mean, that's the difference with, right? Like, is like, yeah, Steven Spielberg and Scorsese were huge cinephiles, but like, there's not like, there weren't like film conventions you could go to and like meet them and talk about it. But even beyond that, like, while I came in, when I started to come in, a lot of the way and it helped me break in to some extent, was like, back when in the age of message boards, like I wasn't on the Warren Ellis forum, but I was in the Bendis. Oh, the Bendis boards. Bendis boards, and that like Mike Oming did the cover for Grounded, the first book that I ever did. I met him through that. Like I've met so many different comics people through that way. But even if you took out the like professional aspect, networking aspect of it, because I wasn't looking at it at that point, I was like,
you're just a fan.
Yeah, I would have loved to be in comics. Yeah, it was a fun thing to do. And now social media has sort of taken that place. It's a little bit, I think, it maybe kind of darker. It's just, I mean, even this week, just thinking of like, a creator getting killed for like saying he didn't like when Superman had red eyes, and wanting to take a break from it, from all the hate he was getting. I mean, I think we've talked about this, off the podcast. Like, I've been very fortunate. Like, I've had nothing but good interactions with people online, and I enjoy it. But with social media, I think being a white male probably helps that. But beyond that, it's still, again, that sense of community has always been there and continues, especially like, again, now in the, with the pandemic, it's like any, the online space, whether it's social media, whether it's DM groups or email lists, just ways to keep in touch with other creators has been one of the things that's just been keeping me alive. It makes you feel, again, writing being such a solitary profession, it makes you feel like, okay,
you're connected.
Like, yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think the funny thing is, like, you were talking about your friend who was your comic friend. I mean, it's finding, especially earlier on, like my first comic friend, I didn't really even make until like 2009. And he like, I don't know. I mean, it's just like you share a common language. It's more than just like being a fan in some ways. And honestly, the funny thing is, you and I are both part of a basketball DM of like comic, people, a bunch of people who like or sports, and that sports have that too, to a certain degree too, because it's like if you talk about sports and you know a lot about it in front of somebody, like I remember doing that with a friend or two friends of mine. One of them didn't follow sports that much, and he was just like, I have no idea what you guys are even talking about. And it was just really funny. I love that aspect of fandom. I'm not saying that like I think the exclusionary aspect is good, but it is cool because it's like once you find somebody that's like that, then you have this bond that it's like somehow more than fandom. I don't know. But I do want, okay, so just moving on a little bit, I did want to talk about, you mentioned you went to law school. I did find it really fascinating. You have 3 degrees, law, English, and drama. It's quite the trio. How in the world did that result in you making comics for a living?
Oh boy. So I went right from undergrad. I went to grad school for dramatic writing, which covers like screenwriting, playwriting. It's that program that was at NYU the master's program. Actually, Brian K. Vaughan went as, I think he did undergrad. And so somehow he was before me, even though he's, I think he might even be younger than me or the same age. We never met, unfortunately. But like they had a program there set up called I think it was called the Stan Hatton Project, where Mark Powers and some other people were like running a thing. But I somehow missed that. But it did give me a foundation in writing that, I think there are many differences between screenwriting and comics writing, but essentially things like structure and, like the visual writing for a visual medium definitely overlap.
Yeah.
In terms of, but I came out of school, I came out of undergrad, and I think I always say and I teach now that I teach writing, I say this often to my students, I feel like it was a mistake of me going right into grad school because I wish I had gone out in the real world and gotten some more experience. I remember on day one of grad school, that being like, oh, don't worry, the only thing you need to have is ideas. And I'm like, oh man, that's the only thing I don't have. And the reason I didn't have that was because I had this very narrow idea of write what you know. I thought that meant write literally what you've experienced or you've observed. And, as a 22-year-old, suburban kid, that just moved into the city, I didn't have that much life experience. And then, as you get older and you realize okay, but write what you know could be, comics, or, you just, how to filter personal experiences through a genre lens. The other part of it was I think I came out expecting well, I'm just going to I'm just going to go right into Hollywood, and that didn't happen. And, I was in New York, that was part of it. If you weren't doing independent film, I thought I was going to be a filmmaker. If you weren't doing independent film in New York, and if, there was basically most writing for movies and TV takes place in Hollywood. You'd think that everybody being remote now, it really wouldn't matter, but the networking part does.
Yeah.
So I went for a few years after grad school, kind of not trying to write. I had an agent but failing to break in, and I was young and impatient, and there were, with a little bit of parental pressure, although my mom would deny this, decided to go to law school. And my plan was, basically a lifelong New Yorker. But I was let me go to, I got a scholarship to go to USC Law School. My plan was, let me get a law degree. So I'll always have a way to support myself. And then I'll also get a job with an entertainment firm out here. And I'll learn the business side of show business, and I'll write on the side. And basically all of that stuff worked, except that I didn't have time to write, or especially in the first and second years of law school, which are killer. And it was ridiculous of me to expect that. And I think what I learned is, I did learn about, I did work for a law firm in the summers and after the first year, part-time, and, it was good to earn money. But I was working for an entertainment firm. So it was helping other creative people make money when I didn't have time to do my passion.
Yeah.
And that was really, It was heartbreaking in some ways. On the other hand, it got me to be like, okay, like if I'm going to be working a long day, I want to be working on something that I really, really care about, or at least work a regular job that gives me the time to work on something I really, really care about. So in my third year of law school, I wrote what became Grounded. It was based on a screenplay that I had written, but like about superheroes. And I had made Mark Powers, he was an editor at Marvel at the time. I was like, do you know any up and coming artists? And he happened to know that like might work on an independent book that like doesn't, that like I can't pay Marvel rates, right?
Right, right.
And I got so lucky that he recommended Paul Azaceta, who now is like, draws Robert Kirkman's Outcast, has been a run in Amazing Spider-Man. But at that point, he'd been an intern at Marvel and he had done a little bit of stuff there, but they hadn't really given him a chance to shine. Like they hadn't let him ink his own work, which is so much a part of his process. Anyway, it was the most incredible stroke of luck that I've had, was just getting put with him, because he's phenomenal talent, a great person, a great collaborator. And so I remember, so like this summer, but like I basically, while in law school, went up to Eric Stevenson at Comic-Con. So this is like, now we're going like 2004, 2005. You could do that. I mean, I still had to wait the entire weekend of like basically stalking the Image booth to do this. Mm-hmm. But like Image wasn't what Image is now. Like, I mean, it still was a big deal, but it was like, it wasn't, The Walking Dead had just started. Like, it wasn't the juggernaut that it is now. So you could do that.
Was he even the publisher then? It was Valentino was then?
No. So I think it was, no. So at that point, it was in between. Larson was the publisher, but Stevenson was still like the guy to talk to. Then, I mean, I think Larson, I'm sure, had to approve the book too. And I got lucky that like, I just like sort of stammered out the pitch. And I think, but thankfully I had Paul's art, and I think that's really what sold it. And I wound up, the summer that I should have been studying for the bar, that's when Grounded got published. And I got very lucky that it did well. We did a second printing of it, which was a huge deal at the time. And like Image let me do more books there. And, within like maybe 6 months of that, I think it was the first New York Comic-Con, like an editor, Janine Schaefer from DC, came up to me and was like, hey, would you want to do some Teen Titans? And I was like, are you kidding? Like, and I was a Marvel guy, but I was like, just the idea of like getting to do that was amazing. And I've been lucky that I have had and still have like a variety of other work that I do outside of comics. Like I've pretty much continually worked. I mean, there've been some, there's been some years that have been slower than others, but that's the long story basically of how I got there through those various degrees.
Well, I think that's the thing though, is like, you never know where opportunities are going to come from. It's like, if you decided not to go to law school and strictly try to become a comic writer or become a screenwriter or something like that, you might not have made it. But like maybe having like that weird pinch where you had very little time and you had to like kind of chase really hard might have put you in a position to do it. Also, coming across Paul was a really good way to get inroads, because Paul is amazing. I have to admit, so the first place that I became aware of you, and I, as we talked about, in the preamble for this, is the first time I interviewed you was back when I was at Multiversity Comics, and it was because I really liked the first couple issues of Graveyard of Empires. I mean, I liked all of it, but I mean, at that point, it was only the first couple. Yeah, the third and fourth, I don't know about that, Mark.
No, it's fine. I mean,
I was kidding. I was just like, those first two issues came out, and I was like, I'd never seen Paul's art before then. And little did I know, I actually didn't know Matt Wilson colored him on that. But I mean, Paul's stuff like completely blew me away. And it's interesting how like Paul in some ways has a similar path to you, because it was like, Paul always seemed like he was just waiting for his moment. And then he got it with Outcast. Like he'd done good work and stuff like that, but it never really felt like he had anything to call his own. And Outcast feels like he's finally got that. I'm glad that the world finally woke up to his greatness, but I
am too. Yeah, nobody deserves it more. He really is that person. Like I just can't stress how good a human being he is. So on top of his talent deserving it, it's just like, oh man, it's so like, as jealous as I can be like of Robert Kirkman as I am, that I'm like, oh man, you got to do more issues with Paul than I did. Like, it's like, I can't help but be happy for Paul.
Yeah. Well, and that actually goes to something that I think has helped you a lot in your career is like you have like I don't know if it's luck or you just have like really amazing taste or great connections, but like I didn't know you worked with Julian Totino Tedesco, and that dude is like I'm going to cuss on my own podcast. Fucking best. That dude is unbelievable. I mean, honestly, like he's mostly known as a cover artist now, but his interiors are really good too. And so like, I remember he did this Thunderbolts run and I was just like, who the hell is this guy? And now he's like the best cover artist in comics. You also worked with Robbie Rodriguez. You worked with PJ Holden. You worked with a lot of great artists. And it's interesting. I mean, that you getting on board with them earlier in their career is like really beneficial because like you said earlier, comics are about relationships. It's about collaboration, and the stronger the collaborators you have, the better chance you have at connecting. So how did I guess like we know how Paul came together. Like, are you just always keeping your eye on the art front, or was a lot of that just kind of right place, right time?
It's a little of both. I mean, I think it's like always keeping my eye on the art front, but of course you can do that and still not find somebody. And like, I think luck always plays something. So I don't want to be like, well, I'm this amazing talent scout. But at the same time, I'm always told like, I don't take compliments well. So I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'd like to think I do have an eye for it. So, I mean, with Robbie, it was a case of, the book Haze that we did together, actually like went through a lot of artists, and Robbie was on the image boards. I don't know if it was the Bendis boards at that point, or it might have just switched over to, I had my own board, Ivan Brandon, who was the editor of, he's a creator in his own right, but he edited Grounded. He had a board that sort of, when the Bendis board kind of got too big, a lot of us migrated over there. So I knew Robbie from a book called Hero Camp. And it came out around the same time as Grounded. Like Grounded was about, a kid who goes to high school for superheroes where everybody has powers except him. Hero Camp was about a camp for superheroes, written by Greg Thompson. It was a really underrated book. And Robbie, I hadn't thought, I thought of, Hazed is this like satirical book about like sororities and like, I don't know, I didn't even think of Robbie for it. And then I don't know, I forget. But then at some point, I don't know if somebody suggested it or if we had known each other and I was like, oh man, like, yeah, I actually think his art would be really cool for it. And just, and it worked out great. With Julian, that was a case of, I believe actually somebody at Boom, so it probably would have either been Mark Waid, who was editor-in-chief at the time, or Matt Gagnon, who used to work, who I became friends with at, he used to be a manager at the late Meltdown Comics here in LA, and we used to talk literally every week. Not just every week on Wednesdays we would talk in the store, and then we wound up going out to dinner every week. And like, I think he may have been the one to find Julian, but I found him once. Like we worked together twice, and I was lucky. Again, now I don't think he even does sequentials anymore. Which look, if you're the best artist, and if you're the way the business is structured, and also if you're one of the best cover artists in the world, you should absolutely be like, there's no need to do it. But it makes me sad a little bit because he's so good at it. Again, I think like for as much as you're like, yeah, the world has discovered Paul, like I still feel like Paul has other levels that we're going to still see. And I feel the same way about Julian. I feel the same way about Robbie. And actually, when I look back, I kind of think like, sometimes I look at with Robbie stuff, like I see somebody that I've talked about, like I still want to work with again, and we're still friends. The right project hasn't come along at the right time. But like, I look at him and I'm like, wow, I saw that he was good, but I didn't see how much he could stretch himself from, if you look at that early work. I mean, even same with Paul, although, like Paul's work really, Paul has a lot of range too. But for me, it's always finding, I guess looking back, it's like what all these, PJ Holden was somebody found online. And PJ is somebody, I look back and actually feel like I wish I was a better writer than to have done his work justice. I to some extent feel that way about Robbie, where like I wish I had written something better for both of them, because they're both tremendous people and also just tremendous artists that I don't know that I took advantage of as well as other writers have. Like Garth Ennis has done some great stuff with PJ Holden, and PJ's a great guy too. I know I'm just saying everybody's a great guy, but I really have been lucky, and I'll just admit the people that haven't been great. But,
yeah. Well, I have to say you're totally blowing my mind. I don't know why in my head I always thought it was Julian. It's Julian. My bad. My bad.
By the way, for all I know, because we've never met in person, we've only talked over email. You know, he's in Argentina. I could be, you could actually be right. And,
Oh, okay.
so it's, you know, there was just somebody on Twitter recently was just saying how
They had
comic
that
creators'
thread.
names have been, and I was so blown away by how many names of people that, and it wasn't like, it'd be bad enough. It was like, okay, it's just people in other countries, but it's like, okay, like it was a lot of American names I wasn't getting right. Like I'm just like, and people that I know, and I'm like, oh man, I've been saying their name wrong.
I feel like that's a long-standing legacy of comics, though, because I remember Marvel used to have in bullpen bulletins, they'd have like a pronunciation breakdown for some of their creators at the time, like Sienkiewicz. I mean, like that's the classic, that's the legendary one. But I do think it's really cool. You told me, and I'm not to put you on blast, but you said privately to me that like the working with those artists and like kind of, you know, I don't want to say discovering them, but, you know, working with them early on in your career is like one of the things you're most proud of. And I could see that. I mean, it's just like a lot of the work you do, like you can write a script, but if you don't find the right collaborator, it's not going to reach its heights. And you found people who were good at doing that very early in their career. And like, that's a really cool thing.
Yeah. It's one of the things like, look, I have no doubt that every single of the artists that we've talked about and others that, I haven't mentioned, anybody that I've worked with would have succeeded without me, like if I had never existed. So I don't want to like take credit for their careers. I'd like to think that like, it does seem like that I helped put a bigger spotlight on them, especially when I was doing work in Image, as Image started to grow, like that put them first of all, I try to give them a chance to do their thing. I mean, that's one thing where it's like, I'd like to think I've gotten to be a better collaborator where, when I started out, I was basically just handing artists scripts. Right. And then, and then they'd ask, like when the difference between working with Grounded on Paul on Grounded, and then 5 years later with him on Graveyard of Empires is like, I handed him a script. And then like, if he made changes, I'd be like, yeah, just talk to me about it. But I'd basically let him do it, as opposed to like, by the time we worked on Graveyard of Empire, it's like, that was a real collaboration. Whereas he was like, yeah, like I've got a lot of thoughts about the story and, yes, thoughts about the visual stuff too. But it's like, I learned like, it took me swallowing some ego. But it was the best thing that can happen is because I just learned like, first of all, it's just better for the project and it's better for the artist. The more that I'm able, you're able to make them feel like they own the project. I mean, financially, I've always been good about that, but it's just like, you want them to own it creatively too, and feel like they're going to do their best work if they feel like they have as much say, if not, as you do. And that like, look, I'm never going to get in the way of like, well, like, obviously they're artists. Like they have a sense of like what's going to work better on a page than I do. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, like I want them to have a say in the story and like, I want their thoughts on it. Maybe there are some things that I'm going to, and there have been times where I'm like, no. Like there's a disagreement and I'm like, yeah, but this thing is really important to me. I know it's maybe boring to draw, but please, like, I can cut the number of pages down on this scene so you can do more action somewhere else. But like, this aspect of the story is really important to me. But yeah, I like to try to, I want to try to put them in a position to succeed and to like, I'm happy. Nothing does make me happier than to see the artists that I work with succeed later. And then, I mean, the only other thing that makes me happier than that is if they want to come back and work with me,
that's the dream
about Paul, right? Like, and, I got to work with Patino again. Like I got to work with Paul again. Like Robbie, I'm still waiting to work for again, but he's done, when I did a Kickstarter, he did like, he did art for it. And on the books that I'm doing now, I work with Jeremy Hahn, who is like one of my best friends in comics.
His cover on Miskatonic is great.
Thank you. Yeah, they're incredible, and they only get better. Like the ones that are not out yet. He did them for God Killers as well. But I first started working with him, God, like almost a decade ago. I did a book called Two-Face Year One with Jesus Saez was the main artist on it. Jimmy Palmiotti inked it, and then the flashbacks in the book, which is funny, a year one book having a flashback to like year negative one. I don't know what I was thinking, but it's actually one of the only books that I've done at like the big two that I'm really proud of, or the most proud of. But Jeremy did the flashbacks in it, and we had like developed this long-standing relationship and have just wanted to work together. And finally, I feel like the covers are, I mean, it's like, I feel like he's doing me a tremendous favor. I mean, he's getting paid, but like, it still feels like just, he's this awesome creator that can write his own stuff. And it hasn't been announced yet, but we're going to be doing a full book together at a different publisher and I'm super excited about, but it's just been, it's always this interesting thing with a friendship where it's like, well, I want to approach him about stuff, but I never want him to feel pressured.
Right.
And even with the covers, I was like, listen, here's a cover gig. I know, I think you can take on some more work, but like, please, like, only take this if like you're being paid well. This is creatively what you want to do. Like, don't feel, I never want the friendship to suffer because I want an art, I want to work with this artist, and I don't want them to feel like that. And, look, realistically, these are people that, as nice as they are, like, if this is their livelihood, they're not just going to be like, well, I'm going to devote a year of my life to something, just
if they don't see it's worth it
that much. But, it makes me, but it is something that I am very proud of is just like finding the talent, working with them, and hopefully leaving, the best thing is just like leaving them in a way that they want to work with me again, whether they can or they can't because of other things. Just like, it's been a good creative experience. It's been a good business experience because, let's face it, with comics, like, there's so many stories of just like, going back to the inception of this industry of like creators, not collaborators, not treating each other well, or publishers not treating collaborators well. So like, it's something that I'm very conscious of. I'm not saying I'm perfect and haven't made mistakes, but it's like, it's really important to me that, my artists are and other collaborators are co-creators, and, they're credited that way. They're paid that way. Like, and, mostly, like that they're creatively that it is a collaboration, because it's, again, writers do tend to get our names come first for whatever reason that started. But it's, I know that, like, I always view, people say like, artists are like directors or something in film. And I think there's some truth to that. I mean, on the same side, it's like, I view them as some sort of mix between cinematographers, but also actors. Yeah. And I mean that both in the sense of like, literally, they're having the characters act. Like, if I write a screenplay, I'm not telling what a character's facial expression should be ever, or like, you don't direct an actor. That's the director's job. Like, if you're a writer, but like, that I can write it down, but it's like, they're doing that. But more than that, it's like, actors are what open movies, right? Like, there's movie stars. Like, yeah, some directors, and now like Marvel has become its own thing, but like through the history of movies, there's always been movie stars. And I feel like artists are that thing. Like, the first thing somebody's going to see if they walk into a comic book store is going to be that cover, and then they're going to see that art. And it's like, if you want to get them to even read, the first line of dialogue or description or, narration that you write, like, you've got to have a great artist. And so, again, like, I just want to, I want to find the best artist for the story, and somebody that's going to be enjoyable to work with, and want it to be an enjoyable experience for them.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's funny that you, in a weird way, Julian, I apologize for however we pronounce your name, but I mean, it's like, he got into a point where he can just do covers. Like, he's just he's that good at it, but he's also that well known for it. And in a weird way, it's like, cover artists have become, I don't know how the right way to phrase it would be, is like, but they are atypically powerful in terms of their impact for the reasons that you're stating. They are like the draw, and like, they are the king actor in some ways. They're the star. And it's really interesting how that's shaped. But I do want to jump into Miskatonic, though, because, you mentioned Jeremy Hahn does covers for that. His first cover is fantastic. I absolutely love it. But it's your next big book, which is coming in November and is on FOC soon. It's you, Giorgio Pontrelli, Pippa Boland, Thomas Maurer, who's doing lettering and design. Really great letterer. I mean, underrated guy.
Oh my God, yeah. I should just say, like, he's lettered every book of mine that I've had a say in the letterer since Graveyard of Empires. So
he's great.
He's like I feel like he's like my secret, maybe hopefully not so secret weapon of, like, he's letterer, he's designer. He's so good. He does so much work. And I feel like lettering is like the unheralded thing, right? Like, where I feel like most people don't notice it unless it's not done well. And he just, if you see the difference between, like, the first lettering draft, or like just what he does to that finished product is very, very hard to put a value on.
Do you know Stephen Finch Phonographics at all?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I interviewed him a long time ago for the Zuda thing that he did. And Zuda Comics, definitely like 1% of the people listening actually knows what that is. But I asked him, I don't remember what my question was, but it was about lettering. And he said effectively what you just said is just like the only time somebody notices a letterer is when it's really bad. And that's kind of a bummer for letterers, because like a lot of them, like Clayton Cowles has like a real impact. Thomas Maurer has a real impact. Aditya Bidikar has a real impact. Like those people are having real impacts, and it's a bummer because like I don't know. They don't get the run that they deserve. But anyways, I'm gonna jump into the solicit for it, so I'm not gonna make you walk through what it is. Miskatonic Valley holds many mysteries: cultists worshipping old gods, a doctor dead set on resurrecting the recently deceased, a house overrun by rats in the walls, but none more recent than a series of bombings targeting the valley's elite. These horrors reach a breaking point when the brilliant, hard-nosed investigator Miranda Keller is sent to stop the bombings. To J. Edgar Hoover, there could be no other explanation than those responsible for similar actions during the Red Scare of the 1920s. But when Miranda digs too deep, she uncovers an unimaginable occult conspiracy, one that may cost Miranda her job and her sanity. So I do think it's funny that you're doing this book in this weird moment for Lovecraftian stuff, because Miskatonic is connected to all that. Because, it's like Lovecraft country is going on right now. It's like bizarrely polarizing. I haven't actually watched it, and near as I can tell, everyone either really loves it or really hates it. And I don't really know, like, I'm probably going to watch it eventually, and I don't really know where I should stand. But it does feel like the Lovecraftian stuff, or like kind of touching on that, is really kind of having a moment again. What was the origins for you? Like, why was this a story you wanted to tell?
So there's a couple parts, right? So like Lovecraft to me was somebody that was like, so, my other, other nerd passion, or one of my other nerd passions, has always been like role-playing games. So as I became aware of Lovecraft through like Call of Cthulhu, which I didn't play as a kid, but I would always see the ads for, and were really genuinely scary and alien in this way that, so like I was aware of Lovecraft for many years before I actually read his stuff. When I finally did, I was blown away. I mean, he's probably the most influential horror writer, on the top three, right? It's like Poe, him, and Stephen King. At the same time, his work is, I hate the word problematic for a lot of reasons.
Oh, it's problematic.
But it's problematic. Like, like it's not even, he was a racist and an anti-Semite, and so it's, and being like, I'm sure the anti-Semitism is probably less there than maybe but I like, I'm as somebody that's Jewish, it was definitely, you notice it, like, and I can only imagine what it was been like for like African American readers, and you see that in Lovecraft Country, which the book of which is fantastic, by the way. But like, like that experience of reading it, but feeling like, oh, like I really want to like this, but like feeling excluded from it has had to have really sucked. So I've wanted to do something Lovecraft related for a really long time. I became, just was like reading up on the FBI. I was reading a book actually called, and I don't think I've touched on this in any other interview or anything I've done with it, a book called Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann, which is about this series of murders on the like Osage, if I'm saying it right, like Indian reservation in like the early part of the 20th century, that the precursor to the FBI, it was like that called the Bureau of Investigation. So it wasn't the Federal Bureau at that point, led by J. Edgar Hoover, sent somebody to solve. And it's an amazing book. I don't want to spoil it for people. It's got so many twists, but it just very much deals deeply with like, American greed and racism and all this stuff. And so I became interested in like, okay, this early period of the FBI, and, which, there was always to me like this idea of like how like going back to like the boardwalk empire kind of stuff, where like you think of the FBI as like going after bootleggers, but really, and prohibition. And in the 30s, they kind of get more into that. But like Hoover was really resistant to that. He was much more obsessed with chasing down like, what he considered to be radicals. So in reading after reading that book and researching that, two things caught my eye. One was, so there were these things called the Palmer raids, there were these series of anarchist bombings in real life I guess in the late 19 teens, where they tried to kill like the Rockefellers and but also the Attorney General, whose name is Mitchell Palmer, and as a result, like J. Edgar Hoover, at that point heading this fledgling Bureau of Investigation, as part of this first Red Scare, winds up overreacting to these few bombings and rounding up tens of thousands of people who were in his mind radicals, but most of them were immigrants. A lot of them wound up getting deported. I want to say Emma Goldman was one of them. So just basically undesirables. And that really resonated with me. Just, I feel like, there are obvious parallels with what have been going on in the past 4 years here, right? Like with immigrants, with the way that people, are being demonized politically. And then the other thing that was really interesting to me was okay, there were 3 female FBI or Bureau of Investigation agents when Hoover took over. There were 0 by the end of the 1920s. There wasn't another female FBI agent until the 1970s when Hoover died. And particularly one of them left. He just didn't think it was work that was suited for women, was basically the bottom line. But the other part of it was one of them who left, and I believe was she from Alaska? I'm actually trying to think now, but one of them wound up being committed to an insane asylum, and that struck this chord with me because I was if you think of Lovecraft stories, half the protagonists wind up in mental institutions,
right?
And I was okay, I didn't want to base it on this person specifically, but I was okay, now here's my in. Is I always thought it would be interesting to explore Lovecraft stories set in the period that they're in, but with what we know about the period now. With okay, yeah, we know that there was it's Prohibition was going on. We know the Red Scare was going on. We know that they were rounding up people, and it was well, and because there are just a lot of parallels between Lovecraft and Hoover. They're both xenophobic and and racist, and how would Hoover have sent somebody? And okay, now there aren't very many women in Lovecraft stories either. That's another. He definitely had his strange personal issues with women, and he was married, but nobody knows if it was even consummated. It was weird stuff going on there.
Yeah.
But I was oh, it gave me an in, not just to be yes, to deal with the problematic stuff, but also I just thought it was an interesting dramatic situation where here's this woman who Hoover wants to get rid of anyway. So he gives her this case, and the easy thing to do would just be to pin it on radicals and go home. But she starts to learn that there's this again, there's this occult conspiracy, and it ties into maybe the radicals in this are actually the good guys. And it's and it's a fun, at the same time, there's all this meta stuff. I feel it's the way that the selling point for the book, I think, is sort of it's a 1920s set X-Files. So Miranda Keller is this female FBI agent who's trying to keep her job, but is also there's a bit of a dark side to her too, in that she knows J. Edgar Hoover likes salacious stuff, so she's willing to
sell to keep her job.
Stuff to do right. And then she's paired with this guy named Tom Malone, who is a character from. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I love the fact that you integrated a character from an actual Lovecraft story, because he was in the horror of Red Hook.
Yes, which is arguably maybe the most racist of Lovecraft stories, and so, but he was an interesting character to me because he's an actual detective. He was a former police officer, which winds up being more timely this year than I intended. But he was former NYPD, but was an Irish cop, literally from Ireland, who studied at Trinity College, and so at the end of the story of end of Red Hook, I don't think it's a spoiler for that story, but not for Miskatonic, is basically he has to retire from the force because of what he's seen. And so the idea of like, she's this sort of skeptical Mulder type, if you're using the X-Files thing, he's the true believer, but he's the true believer who's like, no, like, stop, like this way lies madness. Like, just, so, and I feel like they have a good rapport between them. And it was really, that's what made the book a lot of fun to write from a character perspective.
Yeah. You described it to me as H.P. Lovecraft meets James Ellroy with a X-Files vibe. And I am actually really uniquely a fit for that because I love James Ellroy. I actually did an 8th grade book report on Killer on the Road, and it resulted in my teacher having a conversation with my parents about the fact that I may not be reading appropriate stuff for me. Because it turns out James Ellroy's stuff is really intense. Like, I loved LA Confidential. Did not enjoy that as a book report either. Lots and lots of salacious stuff in there. But anyways, I do really love Miranda as a lead. Like, I feel like she feels like there's a certain level of no shits given to her that I really appreciate. And the fact that, like, the first scene we meet her is basically J. Edgar Hoover clearing house. Like, I don't feel like that's a huge spoiler or anything like that. And she's just basically like, nah, you're not getting rid of me. I got stuff. We got to deal with that. And like, that's a really great jump off point, because it's just like, some of this stuff is going to be insane and it's going to be fanatical. We're using words like cults and monsters and things like that. And you need a lead that can tie you in. It feels like Miranda is very good for that.
Yeah, she's one of my favorite characters that I've written in a long time, and it's like it's been a great experience. I mean, I also have to give credit. The editor of the book, Christina Harrington, was like, I felt like was a big part of this book too, in ways that editors often aren't, like in helping me find Miranda's voice. So I want to give her some credit for that too. But yeah, I think it's, I wanted it to be grounded. And I think where Ellroy, or more recently, like Don Winslow, who wrote the Cartel series of crime books, like came in as like this idea of like setting fictional crime stories among real life events. So whether it's with, the Mexican drug war of recently, or with Ellroy, I think, with LA in the 40s, or, the American tabloid stuff. So that was a way, to me, like that was an exciting thing about this, was like, okay, I want to, I'm writing this historical fiction, but I'm also getting to do this fantastic, and it's crime fiction, but I'm also getting to do this like horror stuff and mix it in. But yeah, Miranda, I think, is somebody that you're going to see a lot of layers to. Like, it's so hard to, it's hard to say anything without spoiler, but I feel like she's just one of my favorite characters that I've written. I'm really hoping that the book does well enough that I get a chance to write more of her. I mean, regardless, the 5 issues of Miskatonic I feel like tell a very complete story. So if I don't get to, I'm happy that I did. But she's just a real favorite of mine. And then the Tom sort of, he's a smart, and he's an Irish cop, but he's got a little of that. Like, he's somewhere in between her and Hoover on the like racism scale, right? He's like about as racist as, or xenophobic as it's not really much racism, but it's like he's about as xenophobic as somebody would probably be in that period, and Miranda is not. And so there's this back and forth on that, on issues like that, and of law and order, and he's kind of hard drinking, and I like the interplay off of that. I think it makes nice tension. Develop her character. Yeah. But yeah, she's just, her character has just been just a joy to write.
Yeah, based off the first issue, it's pretty obvious that she's going to have a complicated experience over these 5 issues. I did want to bring up Aftershock, like Christina Harrington, previously Marvel, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So really, I mean, like, they have a great team over there. I am interested. This is your second book you've done with Aftershock. You've done, your career has been kind of, in terms of publishers, kind of all over the place, especially after you had like a bit of a gap after Graveyard of Empires to, I think, The Dark to a certain degree, not like a total gap, but there was like a period where you weren't doing as much. And since you've returned, you've had kind of an interesting mix. You did a Kickstarter. You did a book for Comixology Originals, and this is your second book for Aftershock. Like, what was it about Aftershock that made it a good fit for Miskatonic?
It was mostly relationships, like any, like as trite as that may sound. Like, so Mike Martz is the editor-in-chief there. Hopefully I got his title right. I met him on the same book I met Jeremy on, doing Two-Face Year One, back when he was at DC. I loved working with him, and I've wanted to work with him again. And then he was founded Aftershock. I mean, was one of the founders, with Joe Pruitt and this guy named Lee Kramer, who had optioned both Hazed and Unthinkable, like had worked in Hollywood, and was one of the few people in Hollywood that I've like trusted and felt like was really honest with me and gave me a good experience. And I saw they were putting together a publisher, and we had been talking for years, and then just about doing something, but how to find the right, it's always like finding the right project. I think, Aftershock was figuring out their thing. And plus they already had like kind of were coming in with certain creators. And then I just got, I pitched them, I wound up pitching them what will hopefully be 3 books that will be, so one was God Killers that's finished coming out in August. The second one is Miskatonic, which is coming out, and then there's hopefully be a third one next year that after we get off the phone I'll probably be writing. It's it's just that like they're all people that I trust. I know Mike, just as soon as I could tell he was a Lovecraft guy, because as soon as I said the word Miskatonic, like he was kind of in.
Yeah, I had no idea what that meant. When I found out it was a valley and then it was tied to H.P. Lovecraft, I was like, oh
yeah, nobody knows nobody knows what it means unless you're like a Lovecraft fan. But I think it, in a weird way, it's kind of, I still think it's just got something about the sound of the word.
It's a cool word.
Yeah, it's just like, look, if I could have called it Lovecraft Country, I probably would, but like somebody got there first. But that said, I think what I liked is, besides the personal aspects of knowing that these are people that I work with, and liking the setup, the deal they had for creators, was just like, they do like cool and smart genre stuff. And I like to think that's what I'm good at. I mean, I feel like I've been all over the place with genre, whether it's, Grounded was a superhero teen book, like Graveyard of Empires is a war horror book. Now, The Dark is a sci-fi book. Like, so, but, I've been, God Killers and Miskatonic broadly fall into the horror category, and they do seem to like horror a lot. But, again, it's one of the things I've liked about comics is,
you can do anything.
Yeah, exactly. So like, even though all the comics I named that got me in were superhero books, it wasn't, I was still either in my teens or very early 20s when I was like, oh, okay, there's Sin City. And then wait, there's like Optic Nerve, like, and Stray Bullets there too. Slowly you go from like superhero to crime, and then you realize, oh, it's literally anything. And that's another freedom. I think it's something that I wrestle with, is like, okay, if I just did one kind of thing, like, would I be a bigger success, right? If I just like stuck to one of those genres.
Like Brubaker and Phillips.
Right. And, and even then, like, I feel like, Brubaker still has more range probably than he gets credit for.
Oh, totally. Totally.
But generally, yeah, like when you think of him, when you think of, mostly you're going to think of criminal, or criminal adjacent books like The Fade Out, even he did, actually, I forget that he did, Fatale, which had a Lovecraftian element to it. So I sometimes wonder about that. And I think, we can talk about some of the, if you want, like some of the think tank stuff I've done, and more of the like war espionage stuff has seemed to have become my calling card lately. I know maybe the horror stuff will change that, but at the same time, I wanted to always, be able to do anything. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I do think that that's actually one thing I appreciate about your stuff, is the fact that, if, believe me, I'm not somebody who's going to ever say like Ed Brubaker is not somebody that like, I'm like, that dude can do whatever the hell he wants forever. I don't really care. Like if it's all crime, good, because it's all good. If it's like, I don't know, psychedelic sci-fi fantasy, sure, why not? Whatever, do your thing, Ed Brubaker. But the thing is like, I don't necessarily think that there is inherently value to being one thing, so far as I think it's more, I think people think of Brubaker and they think that it's going to be good. And I think that's more important than like just being like the crime guy. Because like, you know, if you talk to any retailer,
I hope it is.
but talk to any retailer, like I'm sure you've had conversations with retailers. Retailers will tell you no crime comic sells besides Brubaker and Phillips. And that's the funny thing is like, I don't know if he's the exception to the rule or if it's just Brubaker and Phillips just do their thing and they connect because they're Brubaker and Phillips because people already love them. And I don't really know what it is, but I will say about your stuff, one thing I really appreciate about it is like that was one thing about Graveyard of Empires that I really loved is I read that first issue and I thought it was going to be one thing and then it was something else completely different. And that made it really jive with me. Like I think having, you know, a little bit of the unexpected can sometimes be the hook, even though it requires somebody to read first to begin with. But I don't know, it's complicated.
It's tricky. That book was especially tricky to pull off because, I mean, I can say, you know, if people want to go back and read it, I don't think it spoils it because it's only the first issue. But like, yeah, I mean, that the sort of gimmick, like if you want to call it that, or the trick with that book was like, yeah, it feels like a straight war book for everything but the last page, for like 29 out of 30 pages or however many it turned out to be. That's a tricky thing to do when you have to I didn't think it would work at all because, you know, now it's like, you got to pre-order comics and like 3 months in advance. So like you already know by the time you're reading issue 1, you've already seen the solicits for issues like, you know, for the first 3 issues. So, but I guess, you know, what I learned was like a lot of people really did just pick it up and didn't pre-order. Like probably most people don't. And like for them, it did prove really effective. I mean, there were some people that were thrown and not happy about that. And that's also fine. I wasn't really trying to trick people, but I wanted that.
It's a twist for a reason.
Impact. Yeah, it's like, you know, with a movie, it could be a little bit easier to do because you're just, you know,
one chunk.
You can only show those parts of you have a trailer, you can only show those parts of a movie. It's harder to do with this in a serialized medium. But yeah, that was fun getting to do that, and I'm glad that you liked it.
Yeah. No, I was a big fan of that book and the totality of it, not just the first 2 issues. Well, the last thing on Miskatonic I did want to bring up is Giorgio Petrelli, not somebody I'd ever experienced before. Where was that like an Aftershock find? And you know, why was he the right fit? Because he does great work.
That was an Aftershock find. And I want to say, I think that's Mike Martz deserves the credit for that. You know, he sent over a number of artists that were all good. Something about it, his work, it's really interesting because like, you know, for a while I only had seen his work in black and white until I'll want to talk about Pippa in a second, if that's okay. But like, and just his stuff in black and white is just great. It's like a very simple style that I thought lent itself. I mean, as soon as I liked his stuff anyway, it was very, again, I like people that are like, I think if you were to find something in common with the artists I work with is like, there are people that are capable of doing mainstream stuff, but have a real style to them. I think Paul's that way, right? Like Robbie is that way. Julian, like they've got a flair to it. And I felt like he had that. He had done, you know, he is known for like Dylan Dog in Italy. I think there's an interesting history of like Lovecraftian stuff of, from Italian artists. I'm going to mess up who it's like, is it? But then I get mixed up because I don't know, is it Breccia maybe that's the Italian artist that did Lovecraft stuff. But he was just, I saw his stuff. And then once he started handing in pages, it's very simple, but it's he can achieve so much with just a few lines that he was pretty perfect for it. But then Pippa came in and she came in relatively late in the process. And that was totally Christina. This is Pippa Boland. She is not a well-known name yet, but I feel like she will be because she just took the colors to another level, and I think you'll see it more in the subsequent issues. But the difference between, I mean, the black and white book I think would work on its own, but it's so different, and she does so much work. Like I've been so happy. I mean, and Thomas Maurer does some really great work too. I mean, everybody on the team. It's a really good. It's just a really, really team that works together really well. And I think Pippa's colors are something special and something that, you know, colorists have thankfully, thanks to guys like Matt Wilson, and have like, you know, their work's being appreciated more, but it's like, yeah, hers even with that still really, really stood out to me.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's been like a wave of new colorists that are kind of coming up. I'm trying to remember the name. I like literally just talked about her on, I had Sebastian Gerner on the podcast. And hold on a second. Like the colorist for his new book, Devil's Red Bride, Iris Monaghan, never experienced her either. Fantastic. And it's just, there always seems like there's new colorists coming that the weird thing about, I talked about how cover artists are such a great selling point for me. Colorists quite often are a great selling point for me because they're kind of like, it's like somebody like Matt can do like 6 books a month or something like that. And so he has to be choosy with what he works, or, what books he takes. And so it's like, typically I feel like if Matt, like I trust Matt's taste in books. So it's like, I can buy anything Matt does and I know I'll probably be pretty happy. It helps that he works with a lot of great artists though, like, Chris Somney and Chris Anka and everything like that. So, well, let's jump into the futurist stuff because I do think it's really interesting. We'll close with that. You also have a job as a futurist working in think tanks and like for a variety of industries and fields and everything like that. That's one of those terms that I think people use in a way that doesn't necessarily reflect what it actually is, or they hear it because like Hawkeye says it to Iron Man in Captain America Civil War. What the hell does that mean? And what does that role entail? Like, what does that mean for you?
I mean, so I just want to say, yeah, like my definition of it and what I do may be very different than other people that probably charge more money than I do. But like, so basically, I'll tell you how I fell into it and then sort of describe what I did. So I did a book called Unthinkable for Boom a while back, 2009, 10, around then, which was about a think tank, a real life think tank that was formed after 9/11. And the idea was by the Department of Homeland Security, which I have not worked with. But the idea was, okay, they called 9/11 a failure of imagination, right? Like who would have ever envisioned, like, using planes as suicide weapons, right? Like instead of hijacking them and then hitting these targets. So they took that seriously and they're like, well, actually, like, that stuff, like Tom Clancy had written something like that. So they got a bunch of novelists and screenwriters together and had them come up with worst case terrorist scenarios, with the idea being that, hopefully by coming up with these scenarios, we can come up with ways to stop them before the terrorists have even thought of them. So my take on that with Unthinkable was like, well, what if there was a fictional like writer in this whose terrorist scenarios then started to come true. So flash forward like 5 or so years later, and I've always been, had this interest in military and espionage stuff, dating back to G.I. Joe. But in more serious stuff, like reading like that stuff. And I somehow got the attention of this thing called the Atlantic Council, which is this nonpartisan think tank that deals with like national security and things like that. They had a smaller part of it called the Art of Future Warfare. And first I wound up doing like an interview with them about Unthinkable. And then so the Art of Future Warfare is also putting together creative people and people in the military, intelligence, scientific, business communities, again, to help think creatively about threats that are on the horizon, or the future of conflict more broadly. So they started interviewing me. Then they would have they had a bunch of short story contests. I was at that point writing this screenplay adaptation of Graveyard of Empires that, obviously hasn't been made yet, but I was getting sick of it because I was writing on like the 3rd draft of the screenplay, which made it the 4th draft of the story. And so I started writing these like speculative stories about answering prompts of like, they had to be very specific for about the future of naval warfare or this or that. And I just was writing these short stories, and then they started winning these contests, and it was really freeing because that was during that period where I wasn't having comics out. I was writing a lot, but comics would fall apart either because something would happen with the publisher or with the creator, or some business thing, just things out of my control were falling apart. And here I was just able to, and I was writing something I wasn't really passionate about at the moment. So I got to just do something I had complete control of. It was a short story. As much as I love working with artists, everything I wrote was my own. I had a prompt, so that gave me some framework. And from that, I wound up, so I also teach writing for the School of Visual Arts in New York. I do it online. I've been doing that for 7-8 years now. So all that sort of came together where basically then started, meeting with, doing some like think tank brainstorming exercises, but also going, and I've taught at the Air Force has it's called their Air University down in Montgomery, Alabama. I've gone down to Marine Corps University at Quantico, which was actually really, really super cool. But like I've also gone to help like the Australian Royal Navy like think of like what the future is going to look like. Airbus, which is this European aircraft manufacturer, the Institute for Human Machine Cognition, which is like robotics, and it's just like basically working with these people. And it's like I don't claim to be like some person that can predict the future, but I think I can help people that are in these, especially if you're in the military, like which is very regimented in the way that they teach you to think, to try to give them creative ways to look at the future. And what's been cool about it is I think describing everything I said, like even like it starts to sound like, okay, it's the military industrial complex and it's all, you're just thinking of ways to kill people. And it's actually a lot broader than that. I mean, and it hasn't been like that at all. It's where like, they get a really diverse group of people that they bring in, where, it's thinking about like, well, not just, things like, okay, like one of the big, determining like how successful a state is, one of the big things that determine it, or whether what's a failed state is like women's literacy. It sounds like a small thing, but it's like, actually, like, again, look at Afghanistan, look at other countries that are failed states. It's like, yeah, women aren't empowered there. So it's something that like, if you're in the military and you're thinking just about like bullets, it's like, or drones, like you might not necessarily think about that, but that's as important as thinking about AI or robotics. And it's just been a lot of fun. Like it's been actually kind of, I mean, first of all, it's just fun. Like I've gotten to work with everybody from astronauts to Navy SEALs to submariners, the ones without the wings on their feet.
That'd be a lot cooler, I'm not gonna lie.
That would actually be pretty damn cool. To, like people who are helped like design like Apple TV and things like that. Like it's just been a really interesting group of people and just a lot of people in the military. And, especially given the past 4 years, and like just this country has been so divided, seeing that like, the people I'm dealing with are primarily officers, but like they're really, really smart. They're really, really patriotic, but like not in a jingoistic way. Like
Right.
They generally care about their country. They're really competent. And it makes me sleep better at night knowing that like, okay, these people are thinking about like, are like really seriously thinking about like what the future is going to be like. Climate change is another big thing. Like as much as, whatever president, if we have a president that's denying it, like the military is like, they have to take it seriously because like, that's going to affect where they're deployed.
Right.
That's going to like, it's going to probably be the cause of, it is the cause of a lot of conflicts already, but it's probably going to be the cause of a lot more. So it's just been, and then, the aspect, like, I hope, I'm hopefully able to teach them to think a little bit more creatively, and broaden their horizons a little bit. But certainly, like, I feel like I've been the real beneficiary of it. Like, when I write something like, when I write a book that has a military aspect to it, or an espionage aspect to it, or a science aspect to it, like I have people that I can talk to and learn things that I wouldn't be able to learn from a book. I mean, nobody's telling me anything classified. I'm not
Right.
Like everybody's really good about that. Like, I mean, like once in a while, like I remember one time a Navy SEAL told me something that like they weren't supposed to about how like a specific radio. I mean, it was probably very small, but they're just like, don't repeat it. Sorry. But other than that, like, and of course I'm not going to do that. Like, but like, it's, it's more just of like the human element of it that I find really interesting, and how people think about things. Like just one of the things that's been really interesting to me is like learning that like, like the highest rate of PTSD, I think, is certainly in the Air Force, but maybe in the military in general, is like among drone operators.
Oh yeah.
Which you wouldn't think, because you're like, wait, but they're not in any danger, right? They're operating in like Vegas sometimes, or outside of Vegas, but it's like, actually, yeah, they're following their targets really closely, for weeks. And they're also like, when you're deployed overseas, like you're with your band of brothers, right? You're bonded by that experience. of being in this zone, and like you die for the person next to you, and they die for you. And I mean that's the idealized version of it. It's not always like that, but like
The drone operators are more isolated.
they're more isolated, and then they got to go from literally from killing somebody, you know, to then they can go right home to soccer practice, and that disconnect is just like our brains are not meant for that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not like that's why you have to train people to kill. So it's just like it's stuff like that I probably wouldn't have known without having done this stuff. So it's been really really cool. It's also very sobering. So when I did God Killers, and just really quickly, that book was about like the special forces group that's dealing with insurgents who are using supernatural creatures as weapons of mass destruction. So I think of it as like this spiritual sequel to Graveyard of Empires. It's not the same characters, and it's very different artists, but I was got to learn about the part of doing that book was. Part of it was like saying like we need to really understand the cultures of people that we're involved with, and like, but a lot of it was also just like, there's all these conflicts going on that I think the majority of Americans don't know about. So like, that book, the first two issues take place in the Philippines, and I don't think most of us would know like that there was an Islamic extremist insurgency going on there, and that they also, on the other hand, have this really repressive like authoritarian government. And I mean, even I have Filipino friends and family that didn't know this, and that we've had people over there in various degrees, and it's kind of like I always find it interesting in the same way, like I'm not trying to like I very much don't want to like lecture to my audience, and if I do, I've screwed up, but like I like the idea of like showing them things that I didn't know about and I think are interesting, and I feel like it's important for them to know about. So when I wrote Graveyard of Empires, Afghanistan had kind of fallen out of the news, and like I thought it was important that people talk about it. I hadn't read a lot of comics about it. When I, with God Killers, it was about these different conflicts. With Miskatonic, it's about like, hey, I when I thought of the Red Scare, I always think of the 50s and McCarthy. Like, I didn't know that there was this whole thing in the 20s where like tens of thousands of people were rounded up, and most of 99% of them were innocent. And when you parallel it with what's going on now, like, yeah, I think that is something interesting. You can come to different conclusions about like, what's the balance between civil liberties and security, and different positions on immigration. But at least like, I'm not under the illusion that I'm going to change somebody's ideology, but I feel like at least you get people thinking about it. And then, I mean, if it's not entertaining, it's not going to work, but it's like, yeah, I do think there's a value in that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you go back to what you said earlier about your dramatic writing course, where it's like you went in. Wait, was it dramatic writing, or was it when you? Yeah. So you went in and you were told write what you know. I mean, I'm guessing you had quite the crash course in the expansion of what you know by doing these things. And I think that there's no way that couldn't impact the way that not only you look at story, but also the way that you look at the world, because it sounds like, I mean, almost to a certain degree, as much like, as much as it is about like weapons and stuff like that, it's also to a certain degree about the expansion of empathy and understanding of like how you affect the world. And that seems really important. I do want to jump into just two more things in the future, or just two more things, period. I did want to bring up, you're in the futurist role, and in doing things like this, you're kind of fundamentally built on looking at what the next steps could be. And I'm interested in if that perspective has changed the way that you look at your other work, like comics work and stuff like that, because we're in a period where the way that we engage with entertainment is shifting greatly. Comics are no different. Like, do you look at industries and like your other roles in a different way because of that futurist work?
I think there's some crossover. Like, I mean, the minute you said that, I'm like, yeah, like, okay, comics, like every other industry, is like, we're still, I mean, in one way, like you mentioned, Zuda, right? Digital has been around forever, right? I don't remember how many years ago.
First, that was like a decade ago. It was like 2009, 2010.
So, and for people that don't remember, that was like DC's like foray into webcomics. That was really interesting, actually.
It was really interesting, yeah.
But it, so like, but on the other hand, it's like, yeah, like, so when is there, if slash when is there going to be that tipping point with digital where like, I mean, there's always these rumors that publishers are going to just do digital only single issues and trades for print. And how does that affect retailers and how does that affect creators? So, I mean, I do think of that, again, I mean, one of the biggest things has been just like, I've written about pandemics before, but like, I mean, the ones that I've written about were like, they weren't the focus of the story. And they also were like man-made, which I don't believe this one is. There's some, even among like, I mean, there's some possibility that maybe it got out of a lab, not on purpose, but I think it's probably just came from a bat, like most people do. But that said, like, so I thought a lot about the pandemic, and one of the things I'm writing about, it's like, as much as I thought about pandemics, you wind up being surprised about like what the actual effect of it is, right? Like, I never thought about like, okay, what quarantining for a year would be psychologically.
Oh yeah.
And then, okay, like how does that affect the business? Like I was involved in like, I'm probably almost every other creator and like, doing like auctions in the beginning of this thing to like help keep comic stores afloat. And, thankfully the stores that I go to have like curbside pickup and stuff, but it's like, I think we're going to be just, it's definitely been something I've been thinking a lot about. It's just like, okay, well, when we get back to quote unquote normal, right? Like when we're healthy to go out again, like what's left standing? How much in any job are you like comics, especially like now, like I think people are realizing like on the one hand, like, oh, probably a lot of office space is being wasted because they're like working remotely is just fine. On the other hand, like I'm sure all of us that have been working from home been pretty sick of it and would be happy to like go into an office or just, go outside at all. So, and again, like the thing that I miss most, for selfish reasons, it sucked in the past year that like I've had all these comics come out. I haven't been, I got to go to one convention. I got to go to C2E2.
Mm-hmm.
Supposed to go to ECC and see you there.
The last one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just, so, and I honestly thought I got COVID from C2E2 because I got very sick right when the lockdown started. And I was, I don't think it was COVID. I've tested negative for the antibodies, but that was so long ago, but blah, blah, blah. Like, but yeah, just like thinking about it is like, I feel like I'm really missing that experience, missing doing signings. Like I'll go into a store and I'll sign books, and then they can sell them, but there's something different about it. And I miss it like, on a selfish level of just like, I probably have more sales, but just, I miss that human part of it. And it's like, I hope, I hope just retailers survive because I like retailers and, they're who got me into the business, like into the medium and like, let alone like they've been supporters of mine for a while. But beyond that, it's like, yeah, there's something that just like, you can have a message board and social media and like, we wouldn't know each other if it wasn't for a DM list, probably. I still want that human aspect to remain. So the question is like, what's going to, like, it's something I think about a lot is how this pandemic's going to change that. And how that relates to comics and what publishers are going to survive and all that stuff. So yeah, it's hard not to
have that futurist brain kind of kick into overdrive. Well, I do think it's interesting that, I mean, I brought this up in our interview in 2011 I think it was 2011. It was, when Graveyard of Empires was coming out. And it's interesting to me that you've never really done ongoings, like whether that's by design or it's because that's just how it worked out. Either way, the weird thing about that is I think that after a very long time where miniseries were kind of like a death sentence for retailers, they've actually kind of trended towards being a very like most of the top selling books end up being miniseries in some way, whether it's an event or it's like the Black Label stuff or whatever. I mean, ongoings are harder than ever, but like minis are actually kind of nice now. And it's weird how things like that shift over time. It makes sense, but at the same time, it's kind of a little odd. But
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to change the subject. So if you got anything else to.
No.
So the last thing I wanted to bring up is, we mentioned that we were both part of a basketball DM on Twitter. I have to bring up the New York Knicks. And my question is, do you have to be a futurist to be a Knicks fan?
Yeah, That is a great question. Yeah, I feel like you have to be. And in fact, I would argue. I mean, because so obviously, if you're not following it, it's like the Knicks prospects for the next few years don't look very good. Like right, like this, like we have. I don't think we have a franchise player on the team. I mean, our best players are Mitchell Robinson and R.J. Barrett, and I like Mitchell a lot, but Mitchell Robinson was a second round pick. We're probably not going to. There's probably not going to be able to sign. I don't see Giannis or some big free agent coming. So you really have to take a long view. I actually think one of the problems the Knicks have had is that they haven't taken enough of a long view, and that they've I know you're a baseball fan. Yeah, well, they patch. They first they try to they use the a baseball analogy because I know you're a big baseball stats guy. It's like they only go for home runs, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like they go for home runs. They like for LeBron, like they cleared the decks because they thought they were going to sign like LeBron and another free agent, and it didn't happen. And so they wind up getting Amari, and then they wind up trading for Melo, and they probably could have signed him if they waited a year. People always say like New York fans can't deal with a rebuild, and I don't think that's actually true. I think New York has never actually tried to rebuild. Like they've been bad, but they've never actually like tried to tank for a sustained period of time. Now tanking, it doesn't make as much sense because of the flattened lottery odds.
Right.
But again, the same thing happens with the Kevin Durant and Kyrie thing. Like that one still makes me angry because Kevin Durant denies that he ever was going to come to New York, and I'm like, every NBA reporter was saying that. Like the Knicks, he went
to New York.
Trade was devastating. Yeah, he did, but
not that New York though.
Yeah, I love Brooklyn, like the borough. Like I lived the first 3 years of my life there. My parents are from there, and then the other years that I didn't live there, my grandparents lived there, so I was there almost every weekend. I'm a genuine Brooklyn person. Like the Nets to me are still they're, and to most New Yorkers are still like they're the other team. Like even more so than they were always the New Jersey Nets. Before that, they were an ABA team, the Long Island Nets. I actually want to think Dr. J played for them before he played for the Sixers. So it's I think what happened is Kyrie decided that, and I met Kyrie and he's actually was really nice to me. So I feel bad saying this, but I feel like somewhat, look, the Nets, to their credit, like had a like a better team to go to than the Knicks did. But I think the truth is, if you come to New York, it's the same city, but it's like the media covers the Nets differently. Like the expectations for the Nets are always lower. So there's so much less pressure going to the Knicks. And I think once Kyrie decided, and KD was injured, once KD was injured, he couldn't say I want to go to the Knicks. He was like, and Kyrie decided on Nets, it was just they had to do that. But yeah, they don't think it's my worry now is that they're going to trade for Chris Paul and then just fill it in with veterans and try to win now. There are worlds in which a Chris Paul trade might make some sense, but the idea of the Knicks need to get I think to really take a long view and think 2021 draft, probably 2021 free agency is out. They need to think beyond that and think about just acquiring assets that, they can either, take, maybe they're taking on bad contracts to get draft picks. Maybe they're taking on players that they can rehabilitate and turn around. But to really try to build something slowly and build it right, which they never have. The last time they actually, I think, had a good GM, I think they might have a good GM now. We'll see. But the last time they had a good GM, in my opinion, was Donnie Walsh, who you as a Pacers fan know very well, was an incredible GM in Indiana. And he was good he was getting older in New York and his health was failing, but also Dolan cut him off at the knees. He wanted to hold out on the Melo trade and Dolan forced it to him and then basically forced him out. So anyway,
I know, and so many.
That's really deep.
I'm trying to remember who else was. It was Gallinari. It was Timothy Mozgov, Wilson Chandler, and a draft pick.
Yeah, and that pick I want to say became Jamal Murray.
Oh,
eventually.
Geez.
So so that's not even getting into. Come on, we got who I forget who the Bargnani trade.
Oh God,
turned into so it's just there have been so many things, but yeah, he was. Yeah, we might have not gotten Melo, and for all I actually am a Melo fan. you know, yeah,
He was a fun Nick. He was a fun Nick.
yeah, he was a look. He wanted I for no other reason than he wanted to be in New York. He embraced it, like So whereas other people shy away from that stuff, for for a variety of reasons.
The funny thing is like I you know I would love. I think the league is better with a good Knicks team. I would rather have a good Knicks team, even though I'm a Pacers fan and they're in the same conference, and I don't want them to take the playoff spot from the Pacers. But at the same time, it's just like I just never understand like their off season moves last year where they didn't get KD and Kyrie, so they're like, let's sign 47 power forwards. That just doesn't make sense to me. I know Bill Simmons was pushing the why aren't they taking assets or taking like bad contracts for acquiring assets. I totally agree with him. And I don't normally say that these days about Bill Simmons. And it's just like a lot of that stuff just didn't make sense to me. I will say though, while I don't think you should trade for Chris Paul, him doing pick and roll with Mitchell Robinson and throwing lobs would be pretty amazing.
The argument, like, so I've actually come around to the idea that they may very well sign him, and I've tried to make peace with it. The thing that I like about it is, it would be really fun to watch Chris Paul. Like,
he's great.
He's the Chris Paul that he was
player.
last year. He's one of the, like he's a top 15, worst top 20 player in the NBA. He's fun to watch. He makes people better around him. Yeah. So like him and Mitchell Robinson would be fun. I think if you see what he did in Oklahoma last year, like he made a lot of players, like statistically, you can like better. And I feel like, if combined with some actual player development, and one of the things I like that the Knicks did do is like what Leon Rose did is like they brought in a really smart front office. They brought in like Kenny Payne, who was like this assistant in at Kentucky that was, has worked with like Karl Anthony Towns and a lot of other really great
Jamal Murray,
players.
probably.
I don't. Does he go back as far as Anthony Davis? I mean, and people immediately said, "Oh, well, they're bringing him in because they think they can get these players." And it's like, no, they know they're not getting Anthony Davis. Like, he's a really good development guy that any of those Kentucky players, and I'm as a Duke fan, I hate Kentucky, but like they'll say amazing things about. They brought in Brock Allard, who's this salary cap specialist. They brought in, I'm forgetting the name of the scout from Utah who found Donovan Mitchell later in the draft, and just been really great for them. And so like, I'm hoping that this front office is really good, but if they actually start I don't know, maybe all the picks that maybe like Kevin Knox and Dennis Smith Jr. and Frank Ntilikina, maybe they are busts, but I feel like they were like, they weren't played the right minutes. They weren't put in the right lineups. There was no, according to anybody who knows, people who know things about the Knicks, there was no player development program there. And now they have one. So if you combine that and just that Chris Paul, both from a passing, just on the court standpoint, but also just from a competitive standpoint, can make these players better. Whether
he made the Thunder's young players better. I mean, it's undeniable. I mean, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Luguentz Dort and everybody else. I mean, they had some real strides on that team. I will say too, it is really hilarious that you guys got this amazing player development group put together, and then you hired Tom Thibodeau, which is it's wild. Yeah, famously does not like playing young players. It's wild. The last thing I'm going to say about the Knicks though, I do think that it's really funny that everyone says that you can't intentionally tank in New York. Like, you can't do it. Like, they expect competition. And the Knicks have been bad for forever, so they just accidentally tank over and over. It makes no sense.
It's so frustrating. I mean, the fans will still show up. I mean, Knicks fans are but yeah, it's the Mecca. Yeah, it's so. But I think if you were, there would be something, look, you can't legally probably or whatever within the rules of the NBA say you're going to tank. But if they were to say listen, don't expect a winning team next year or the year after. It's going to take us 3 years to build a contender. If the Knicks are honest about that and then actually tried to do it, they'd be fine. That said, the Knicks it's like the Knicks fans, especially I think having grown up with those '90s teams, they value defense and hustle. So if they see people are not hustling, they'll boo them. So there is that part of it, but I do feel I don't know. I think the Knicks have to reevaluate, thinking about yes, New York is the biggest market in the world, but that stuff matters less. Media market, like, not in the world, but like certainly in America, like, that stuff matters less now. And that, like, yeah, Garden is a great place to play, but like, you have to give people a reason. You have to do like what the Heat did. As much as I hate Pat Riley for leaving the Knicks, like, building that culture there, like, that makes it an attractive. Yes, South Beach makes it an attractive place to go too, but like, you can see from this year, like, building that culture makes it an attractive place, and that's what they have to build.
Yeah,
I think Tom Thibodeau, like, to his credit, like, he actually he helped develop Derrick Rose and
Jimmy Butler
and Noah, Joakim Noah, and like all those, like, they're so he doesn't love to play those young players, like, but like. So I want to try to give him the benefit of the doubt and see. He also says he's changed. I mean, the other knock on him is that he'll play people too many minutes, and drive them into the ground. So, like, hopefully he's learned something. I think Minnesota was a place where, okay, he was also the GM, and I don't think that was a role suited for him. Yeah, so it's like I do believe in Leon Rose. Like, I think he just from the hirings he's done so far. That said, he can do some stupid things, and I can lose my belief in him. There was at one point it seemed like a good idea to have Phil Jackson in the organization. So, you could always be wrong. But like, and I mean, the one good thing Phil Jackson did do was like not give up any first round picks.
Yeah.
I mean, he also drafted Porzingis, but that ultimately didn't end well for us.
Well, Mark, I'm sure we could go deeper into the history of the Knicks, especially because our teams are rivals. But that is actually all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Miskatonic, your career, the Knicks, being a futurist, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, David. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Mark Sable. You can find him on Twitter at Mark Sable and in the upcoming Miskatonic at Aftershock. Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out Sketched, my subscription comic site, for long-form articles, interviews, and more. And consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketch. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter and Instagram at SketchComic or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Bacella, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Alan Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Fowl, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Strelly, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.